The morning sun peeked through the massive windows of Harrington Estate, casting long shadows across the marble floors that Elena Vasquez had just finished polishing. She straightened her back slowly, feeling the familiar ache that came from hours of bending and scrubbing. At 42, her body reminded her daily of the physical toll her work took, but her face rarely showed it. Elena tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear and glanced at her watch. It was barely 7:30 a.m., and she had already cleaned the main entrance, the dining room, and was halfway through the east wing. Elena had been cleaning Victor Harrington's mansion for nearly 3 years now. The pay was better than what most cleaning services offered, and she needed every dollar she could get. Her mother's medical bills weren't going to pay themselves, and her daughter Anna was in her second year of college, the first in their family to attend university. Pride and necessity were powerful motivators that helped Elena endure Mr. Harrington's cold demeanor and occasional cutting remarks. The sound of expensive leather shoes clicking against marble made Elena tense up slightly. She quickly gathered her cleaning supplies, trying to make herself less visible. It was an unspoken rule in the Harrington household. The help should be efficient, thorough, and above all, invisible. "Ms. Vasquez," Victor Harrington's voice echoed in the hallway. "The banister in the main staircase still has fingerprints on it." Elena turned to face her employer. Victor Harrington stood tall at 6 feet 2 inches, his posture perfect as always. At 55, his salt and pepper hair and sharp features gave him a distinguished appearance that matched his reputation as one of the city's most successful real estate developers. His tailored suit probably cost more than Elena made in 3 months. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harrington. I'll take care of it right away," she replied, keeping her voice steady and her eyes slightly lowered. "See that you do. I'm hosting an important dinner tonight with potential investors. Everything must be perfect." He glanced around the hallway with critical eyes. "And make sure the crystal chandelier in the dining room is spotless. Last time I noticed dust on the upper tiers." Elena nodded. "Yes, sir. I'll check it twice." Victor's phone rang and he turned away without another word, immediately engaged in what sounded like a high-stakes business conversation. Elena watched him walk away, his shoulders straight, his entire being radiating authority and power. She sighed quietly and headed toward the main staircase. The mansion was a work of art, a 15,000-square-foot testament to Victor Harrington's success. 6 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, a home theater, an indoor pool, a wine cellar, and Elena's secret favorite, the grand hall with its magnificent baby grand piano. The piano sat in perfect position by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens, bathed in natural light during the day, and carefully positioned spotlights in the evening. Yet in all her time working there, Elena had never seen anyone play it. As she polished the banister, making sure to remove every fingerprint, she thought about her life before coming to America. Her mind drifted to the small apartment in Mexico City where she had grown up, the walls thin enough that neighbors could hear when she practiced piano. Elena had been something of a prodigy once, earning a scholarship to the National Conservatory of Music when she was just 16. For 3 wonderful years, she had lived and breathed music, her professors suggesting she might have a future as a concert pianist. Then her father had died suddenly, and everything changed. With no one else to support her mother and younger siblings, Elena had given up her scholarship. She played at weddings and restaurants for a while, but the pay wasn't steady enough. When she met Carlos and got pregnant with Ana at 23, they decided to move north for better opportunities. Carlos was gone now. Their marriage hadn't survived the pressure of building a new life in a strange country. But Elena had managed to create a stable home for Ana. Sometimes Elena wondered if Mr. Harrington had any idea who really cleaned his mansion. Did he know that the woman who scrubbed his toilets and polished his marble floors had once made an audience of 500 people cry with her interpretation of Chopin's Ballade No. 1? Probably not. To him, she was just Ms. Vasquez, or sometimes just the cleaner, when he spoke about her to others. "You're not just a cleaner," Elena whispered to herself, a habit she'd developed over the years to maintain her dignity. "You're a mother who put her daughter through college. You're a daughter taking care of your mother. You're a musician who can still play every note of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata from memory." She finished the banister and moved to the dining room to check the chandelier. The custom-made piece featured hundreds of crystal drops that caught and scattered light in rainbow patterns across the room. Elena carefully positioned the ladder and climbed up, feather duster in hand. making sure to clean even the highest tier. The dining room table was already set for tonight's dinner party. Fine china, sterling silver flatware, and crystal glasses arranged with mathematical precision. Fresh flowers waited in the cooler in the kitchen. They would be arranged just before guests arrived. Elena knew the routine for these events by heart. Mr. Harrington's parties were always elegant affairs, with expensive wine flowing freely, and conversations about investment opportunities, market trends, and occasional gossip about other wealthy people Elena had never heard of. During these events, she and the other staff, usually brought in, specifically for the occasion, wore black and white uniforms and moved silently through the rooms with trays of appetizers or fresh drinks. Elena checked her phone during her short break, smiling at the text from Anna. Her daughter had aced her biology exam and was celebrating with friends. Elena texted back a quick congratulations, adding a few heart emojis. Anna was studying to become a nurse, a practical choice that would lead to a stable career. Sometimes Elena wondered if her daughter had inherited any of her musical talent. But Anna had never shown much interest in piano. Perhaps that was for the best. By midday, Elena had moved to the grand hall. She dusted the piano carefully, running her cloth over the gleaming black surface without touching the keys. Sometimes when she was certain the house was empty, she would open the lid and just look at the strings and hammers inside, marveling at the craftsmanship. Once or twice she had been tempted to play, just to feel the ivory beneath her fingers again, but she never did. The risk of being caught was too great, and she couldn't afford to lose this job. The afternoon passed quickly as Elena worked her way through her cleaning routine. She was thorough and methodical, taking pride in her work despite Mr. Harrington's inability to acknowledge it. She overheard him on the phone in his office, his voice carrying through the half-open door as she dusted the hallway. Yes, everything's set for tonight. The chef will arrive at 4 and the staff will be ready by 6. I've got that Russian investor coming, the one I told you about. If we can get him on board, the downtown development is as good as funded. There was a pause. No, I'm not worried. These people are easy to impress. Good food, good wine, and an atmosphere of success. My home does most of the selling for me. Elena moved quietly past the door, careful not to attract attention. Mr. Harrington continued his conversation, unaware or unconcerned about being overheard. To him, Elena was as invisible as the artwork on his walls, present but not worth noticing. At 3:30, Elena began her final preparations before the event staff arrived. She made one last sweep through the main areas, checking for any spots she might have missed. The floors gleamed, the windows sparkled, and every surface was dust-free. She changed into her service uniform in the small staff bathroom near the kitchen, pulling her hair back into a neat bun and applying a touch of lipstick, her small act of feminine dignity. The caterers arrived precisely at 4, and the kitchen burst into organized chaos. The chef, a temperamental man with a French accent who had catered many of Mr. Harrington's events, barely acknowledged Elena as he directed his assistants in the preparation of what would undoubtedly be an impressive meal. By 5:30, everything was ready. Elena stood with the other service staff, 2 young men and a woman, all hired for the evening, as Mr. Harrington gave his usual pre-event instructions. Remember, I expect perfection tonight, he said, his eyes cold and assessing as they swept over the staff. These are important people. Keep the glasses filled, serve from the left, remove from the right, and stay invisible. These are not people who want to notice you're there. Elena felt a familiar tightness in her chest at his words. Stay invisible. The story of her life in America. But as the first guests began to arrive at 6 o'clock, and Elena took her position near the entrance with a tray of champagne flutes, she reminded herself again of who she really was. You're not invisible, she thought. You're Elena Vasquez, and once upon a time, you made music that moved people to tears. The grand piano sat silently in the corner of the room, gleaming under the spotlights, waiting for fingers that knew how to bring it to life. Elena moved among the guests with her tray, efficient and unnoticed, while somewhere deep inside her, a melody still played. The evening air buzzed with conversation and clinking glasses as Victor Harrington's dinner party hit its stride. 20 of the city's wealthiest investors and their spouses filled the grand dining room, their laughter bouncing off the high ceilings. The chandelier that Elena had so carefully cleaned earlier now cast a golden glow over the scene. making the diamonds on the women's necks and ears sparkle with each movement. Elena moved silently among the guests, her black and white uniform blending into the background. She refilled wine glasses and collected empty plates with practiced efficiency. Though she kept her eyes down, she couldn't help overhearing snippets of conversation about deals worth millions and vacation homes in places she'd only seen in magazines. "Victor, you've outdone yourself again," said a gray-haired man in a tailored blue suit. He was Paul Winters, one of the most influential property developers in the state. "This Chilean sea bass is perfection." Victor raised his glass in acknowledgement, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. "Only the best for my friends and partners. Speaking of which, I hope you've had a chance to look over the proposal I sent last week." Elena noticed how Victor's charm seemed to switch on and off like a light. With investors, he was all warm smiles and hearty laughter. The moment they looked away, his face returned to its usual cool, calculating expression. It was the same expression he wore when telling Elena about a spot she had missed or a task that needed redoing. "The Russian investor is watching you," whispered Mia, one of the other servers, as they passed each other near the kitchen door. "The bald one with the gold watch. He keeps asking for you specifically when his glass needs filling." Elena glanced discreetly at the man in question. Dmitry Volkov sat near the head of the table, his expensive watch catching the light with every gesture. He was known for developing luxury hotels across Europe and Asia, and Victor had been trying to secure his investment for months. With a silent nod to Mia, Elena made her way to Mr. Volkov's side, wine bottle in hand. As she leaned in to refill his glass, she felt his eyes on her, lingering a moment too long. "Thank you," he said, his accent thick but his English clear. Elena nodded politely and tried to move on, but his voice stopped her. "You have musician's hands. Piano, I think?" Elena froze for a split second, surprised by the observation. "Yes, sir. Many years ago." From the head of the table, Victor frowned. Staff weren't supposed to engage in conversation with guests. Elena quickly moved away, feeling Victor's disapproving gaze follow her. The chef had outdone himself tonight. Following the sea bass came a perfectly cooked rack of lamb with roasted vegetables and a truffle risotto that filled the room with its rich aroma. Elena helped serve each course with care, her movements precise and unobtrusive. Years of practice had taught her how to be present without being noticed. By the time dessert was served, an elaborate chocolate creation with gold leaf, Victor had moved the conversation firmly to business. The wine had flowed generously throughout the meal, and the guests were in high spirits, their faces flushed and voices growing louder. "The downtown project is the opportunity of the decade," Victor was saying, his own glass refilled for the 5th time. Elena noticed a slight slurring in his speech, though he hit it well. "We're talking about transforming 10 city blocks into the most exclusive residential and commercial space in the region." "The numbers are impressive," said Mr. Volkov, leaning back in his chair. "But I've seen impressive numbers before. What makes this different?" Victor launched into his practiced pitch about location values and growth projections. Elena tuned out his words as she began clearing the dessert plates. She'd heard it all before at previous dinner parties. Different projects. Same promises of extraordinary returns. "More champagne for the toast," Victor called over his shoulder, not bothering to look at which staff member responded. Elena quickly went to the kitchen and returned with a tray of filled flutes. The timing had to be perfect. Glasses distributed just as Victor wrapped up his pitch, allowing everyone to raise their drinks in unison. Elena moved around the table with practiced grace, setting a champagne flute by each guest. The conversation had grown even louder, with multiple people speaking at once, creating a wall of sound that made it difficult to concentrate. As she reached across to place a glass near a woman wearing an oversized diamond necklace, the guest shifted suddenly, bumping Elena's arm. Time seemed to slow down as the tray tilted. Elena tried to steady it, but the momentum was already set. 3 champagne flutes tipped over, sending sparkling liquid splashing onto the white tablecloth. One glass rolled to the edge and shattered on the hardwood floor with a crash that somehow cut through all conversation. The room fell suddenly, painfully silent. Elena's heart pounded in her chest as she quickly set the tray down and dropped to her knees, picking up the larger shards of glass with trembling fingers. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice sounding too loud in the quiet room. "I'll clean this up right away." She felt rather than saw Victor rise from his chair. His shadow fell over her as she knelt on the floor, and when she dared to glance up, his face was tight with barely controlled anger. "Well," he said, his voice dangerously soft, "it seems my staff is feeling rather clumsy tonight." A nervous chuckle rippled through the guests. Elena kept her eyes down, wishing she could disappear into the floor. This job was her lifeline, the steady income that kept her mother in her care home and her daughter in college. The thought of losing it made her stomach clench with fear. "Perhaps," Victor continued, a new edge entering his voice, "my cleaner believes herself too refined for basic service." Elena could hear the forced smile in his tone, the one he used when turning an uncomfortable situation into entertainment at someone else's expense. She had seen him do it before with other staff members. Now it was her turn. "Ms. Vasquez," he said, using her name for the first time that night. "Stand up, please." Slowly, Elena rose to her feet, keeping her eyes lowered. The other servers had melted away into the kitchen, leaving her alone. "Do you know?" Victor said, addressing his guests now. "Ms. Vasquez here was just telling Mr. Volkov that she's a pianist." His voice dripped with mockery. "Isn't that fascinating? My cleaner is actually an accomplished musician who simply chooses to scrub my floors." More laughter, uncomfortable but present. Elena's cheeks burned with humiliation. "I apologize for the interruption, Mr. Harrington," she said quietly. "If you'll excuse me, I'll get something to clean." No, Victor cut her off, raising his hand. The alcohol had clearly loosened his usual restraint. "I think we're all curious now. We have this beautiful piano sitting right there, gathering dust." He gestured toward the baby grand in the adjacent room, visible through the wide doorway. "Perhaps Ms. Vasquez would rather showcase her cultural talents." Elena felt her blood run cold. She hadn't touched a piano in years, not properly, not to perform. And now he wanted her to play in front of these people? It was cruel, designed to humiliate her further. "Mr. Harrington, please," she started, but his expression hardened. "I insist," he said, no longer smiling. The words carried the unmistakable weight of a command. "Play, or pack your things." The dinner guests watched with a mixture of discomfort and morbid curiosity as Victor gestured toward the piano. "Ladies and gentlemen, a special performance from my staff. Elena, why don't you play something for us? Show us what talented hands you have." The room waited, the silence stretching painfully. Elena looked around at the faces staring back at her, some embarrassed, some amused, some merely curious. At the far end of the table, Mr. Volkov watched with an unreadable expression, his fingers tapping lightly on the tablecloth. For a brief, rebellious moment, Elena considered walking out. She could hold her head high, maintain her dignity, and find another job. But then she thought of her mother's medical bills, of Anna's tuition payment due next month. She thought of how hard she had worked to build their life here. Slowly, Elena set down her serving towel. With every eye in the room following her, she walked to the piano. The polished black surface gleamed under the spotlights, just as she had left it that morning. She adjusted the bench and sat down, her uniform skirt pulling tight across her knees. Her hands hovered above the keys, trembling slightly. It had been so long. What if she couldn't remember? What if her fingers, stiff from years of cleaning, betrayed her? Behind her, she could hear Victor speaking in a stage whisper. This should be entertaining, at least. Elena closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then, almost without conscious thought, her fingers found their home on the keys, settling into the familiar opening notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece she had played 100 times in another life, a piece her heart had never forgotten. The first notes hung in the air like delicate glass ornaments. Elena's fingers moved tentatively at first, finding their way back to a place they had not visited in years. The nocturne began softly, almost hesitantly, a whisper of sound that made several guests lean forward in their seats to hear better. Behind her, Elena could sense rather than see the smirks and expectant glances. She knew what they were waiting for, a fumbled note, a jarring mistake that would confirm their assumptions. That she was just a cleaner pretending to be something more. That Victor's cruel joke would land as intended. Her hands were stiff, her timing a bit off. The first few measures were clumsy, like someone trying to speak a language they had once been fluent in but had not used for decades. Elena felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She had once played this piece to a standing ovation at the conservatory. Now she could barely make it through the opening. Then something shifted. Maybe it was the familiar feeling of the ivory beneath her fingertips, or the way the pedal responded to her foot. Maybe it was the music itself, patient and forgiving, waiting for her to remember. But somewhere around the eighth measure, Elena's body remembered what her mind had forgotten. Her back straightened slightly. Her wrists relaxed. Her fingers began to move with greater confidence, finding the delicate balance between strength and gentleness that Chopin's music required. The melody flowed more smoothly now, rising and falling like gentle waves. Elena closed her eyes. The dining room, the guests, Victor Harrington, all of it faded away. She was 20 years old again, playing in a small recital hall in Mexico City. Her mother was in the front row, eyes shining with pride. Her teacher was nodding approvingly from the side of the stage. The music was not something she was performing. It was something she was living. The piece grew in complexity, Elena's left hand providing the steady, rolling accompaniment, while her right hand carried the increasingly emotional melody. A few small technical errors crept in. A note played a fraction too soon, a phrase that could have been shaped more elegantly, but they hardly mattered. What filled the room now was not merely sound but feeling. At the table, the smirks had faded. Guests who had been mid-whisper fell silent. Wine glasses remained suspended halfway to lips forgotten. Eyes that had been watching with amusement now widened with surprise, then softened with something approaching reverence. Victor Harrington stood frozen near the head of the table. The glass of scotch he had been raising hung in mid-air. His expression shifted from smugness to confusion to disbelief as the music continued to fill his home. This was not the stumbling attempt he had expected. This was not the joke he had intended to play at his cleaner's expense. As the piece progressed, Elena's confidence grew. Her fingers remembered more, found more. The middle section of the nocturne intensified, and she leaned into the crescendo, her body swaying slightly with the music. Here was the Elena who had once dreamed of concert halls, who had once made her teachers whisper about her rare gift. The years of labor had not stolen her musicality. They had merely buried it beneath the necessities of survival. In the kitchen doorway, the other servers had gathered, listening in astonishment. Mia had her hand over her mouth, eyes wide. The chef, who had been barking orders moments before, stood silent, a dish towel hanging forgotten in his hands. Mr. Volkov, the Russian investor, watched with particular intensity. His eyes never left Elena's hands as they traveled across the keyboard. He alone did not seem surprised, as if he had recognized something in her that the others had missed. The nocturne began its final section, returning to the gentle theme of the beginning but with a new depth, as if the melody had journeyed somewhere and returned changed. Elena's touch grew more delicate, the notes floating like leaves on a breeze. The piece required a gradually diminishing sound. A peaceful farewell that was among the most difficult things to achieve on a piano. Yet Elena's hands remembered this too. How to make the notes fade without losing their warmth. How to tell the listener that the end of this story was not sad but simply complete. As the final notes dissolved into silence, Elena kept her eyes closed for a moment longer. She was not ready to return to reality, to Victor's dining room, to her role as the invisible cleaner. In the music, she had been herself again. Fully, completely herself. Not defined by her job or her struggles or the way others saw her. The silence stretched. Elena finally opened her eyes, expecting to see mockery or dismissal. Instead, she found the room absolutely still. Every face turned toward her with expressions ranging from astonishment to open admiration. For several seconds, no one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Then, from near the end of the table, Mr. Volkov began to applaud. The sound broke the spell, and suddenly the entire room erupted in genuine applause. Several guests rose to their feet. One woman dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. "Brava," called someone from the middle of the table. That was extraordinary. Elena sat motionless, her hands now resting in her lap. She felt oddly disconnected, as if the person they were applauding was someone else, someone she used to know. She glanced toward Victor, trying to gauge his reaction. He had not joined the applause. His face was unreadable, a complex mix of emotions fighting for dominance. Surprise, certainly. Embarrassment, perhaps, at having his mean-spirited joke backfire so spectacularly. But there was something else, too. A kind of wonder, as if he were seeing Elena, truly seeing her for the first time. Their eyes met across the room. Victor quickly looked away, setting down his drink with a sharp click against the table. "Well," he said. his voice lacking its usual confidence. That was unexpected. Mr. Volkov rose from his chair and approached the piano. His applause had faded, but his expression remained appreciative. "Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major," he said, standing a respectful distance from Elena. "One of my favorites." "You play with great feeling, Ms. Vasquez. Where did you study?" Elena hesitated, unsure if she should answer. She was still a server at a dinner party after all, but something had changed in the room. Some invisible boundary had shifted. "The National Conservatory in Mexico City," she replied, her voice quiet but steady. "Many years ago?" Mr. Volkov nodded. "The technique may fade with time, but the soul of a musician never does. My mother was a pianist at the Moscow Conservatory. I recognize the training in your hands." From the head of the table, Victor cleared his throat loudly. "If we could return to dinner," he said, an edge of irritation in his voice. We were discussing the downtown development project. The guests reluctantly returned to their seats. Elena rose from the piano bench, smoothing her uniform skirt with trembling hands. Her heart was still racing, both from the performance and from the unexpected response. Part of her wanted to run from the room, to escape the stares and whispers that would surely follow. Another part felt strangely liberated, as if a weight had been lifted that she hadn't fully realized she'd been carrying. She made her way back to her cleaning cart, intending to deal with the broken glass and spilled champagne. But as she passed the table, Mr. Volkov spoke again. "Victor," he said, his tone casual but his eyes sharp, "you never told me you employed a concert pianist as your housekeeper. What other talents are you hiding in your staff?" A few guests laughed, but the sound was different now, less at Elena's expense and more at Victor's. The power dynamic in the room had subtly shifted. Victor's jaw tightened. "Ms. Vasquez is an excellent employee," he said stiffly. "Now about the investment opportunity." Yes, Mr. Volkov waved his hand dismissively. "The numbers are impressive, but I'm more interested in knowing why someone with Ms. Vasquez's gift is cleaning your house rather than performing on stage." All eyes turned back to Elena, who was now kneeling to clean up the broken glass. She felt the weight of their curious stares but kept her focus on the task at hand. This was still her job. These were still her responsibilities. One moment of music didn't change that, but as she worked, she could feel something stirring inside her that had been dormant for too long. The piano had awakened memories, desires, and dreams that she had carefully packed away. Her fingers, now picking up shards of glass, still tingled with the memory of the keys. Victor attempted to steer the conversation back to business, but the mood had changed. The dinner party continued. Dessert was served and deals were tentatively discussed. Yet every now and then, guests would glance toward Elena as she moved quietly around the room, as if seeing a stranger where the invisible cleaner had once been. As the evening drew to a close and guests began to depart, Elena overheard fragments of conversation. Never heard amateur playing with such emotion. Wonder what her story is. Harrington probably had no idea. Elena kept her expression neutral, her movements efficient, but inside something had been shaken loose, something that could not be easily put back into place. The last guest left shortly after midnight. Elena moved through the dining room in silence, gathering empty glasses and dessert plates. The other servers had already gone home, their shift having ended at 11. Only she remained, tasked with the final cleanup before tomorrow's more thorough work. The mansion felt different now. The rooms that had always seemed so imposing, so coldly perfect, now echoed with the memory of music. Every time Elena passed the piano, she felt a pull toward it like gravity. She heard footsteps behind her and tensed. Victor Harrington entered the dining room, his tie loosened, his eyes slightly bloodshot from the evening's drinking. He stood in the doorway watching her work for a long moment before speaking. "You never mentioned you could play like that." His voice was flat, difficult to read. Elena continued stacking plates. "You never asked, Mr. Harrington." She kept her eyes on her work, but she could feel him studying her, as if trying to reconcile the woman who had sat at the piano with the one who had cleaned his house for 3 years. "The National Conservatory," he said finally. "That's a serious institution." "Yes, sir." "Why did you leave?" Elena paused, a wine glass in her hand. The question surprised her. Not just that he had asked it, but that he seemed genuinely curious. In 3 years, this was the first personal question he had ever directed at her. "My father died," she said simply. Someone had to support my mother and siblings. Music doesn't put food on the table, not reliably. Victor moved further into the room, running his finger absently along the back of a chair. Volkov was impressed, he said. He wants to meet with me tomorrow, says he's interested in the downtown project. So that was it, Elena thought. Her unexpected talent had somehow helped his business deal. No wonder he was speaking to her. I'm glad, she replied, keeping her voice neutral. He asked about you, Victor continued. Wanted to know if you still played regularly. I didn't know what to tell him. Elena carried the stack of plates toward the kitchen, forcing Victor to follow if he wanted to continue the conversation. To her surprise, he did. I don't, she said as she placed the dishes by the sink. There hasn't been time. Or opportunity. You could have asked. To use the piano, I mean. Elena turned to face him directly for the first time. Would you have said yes, Mr. Harrington? If your cleaner had asked to play your $30,000 Steinway? Victor had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. They both knew the answer. Well, he said, straightening his cuffs in a nervous gesture she had never seen before. You're welcome to play it now, if you want. When your work is done, of course. Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The offer felt both like a peace offering and a reminder of her place. Welcome to the piano, but only after the floors were scrubbed. Good night, Ms. Vasquez, Victor said, already turning to leave. The dinner was a success despite the incident. Good night. Mr. Harrington, she replied, watching him walk away, his steps slightly unsteady from the alcohol. Elena finished cleaning the kitchen around 1 in the morning. Her back ached and her feet hurt, but her mind was surprisingly alert. As she pushed her cleaning cart toward the supply closet, she found herself stopping by the grand hall. The piano sat in the dim light, only the security lights illuminating its polished surface now. Elena hesitated, glancing toward the staircase where Victor had disappeared nearly an hour ago. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional settling of old wood. Slowly, she approached the piano. He had said she could play, hadn't he? Carefully, she sat on the bench and lifted the cover from the keys. Without the pressure of an audience, without Victor's cruel challenge, she could take her time. She placed her fingers on the keys and began to play softly, a simple Bach prelude that had once been her warm-up exercise. Her fingers were stiff, but they remembered. Note by note, measure by measure, the music came back to her. Elena played softly, mindful of the late hour, but she played with her whole heart. The Bach led to a Schubert impromptu, then back to Chopin. Not the nocturne from earlier, but a waltz she had once loved. She lost track of time, lost in the rediscovery of something precious she had set aside for too long. She didn't hear the soft footsteps on the stairs, didn't notice the figure that paused in the shadowy doorway to listen. When Elena finally closed the piano lid, it was nearly 2:30. Her fingers ached pleasantly, like muscles after good exercise. She felt lighter somehow, as if she had set down a heavy burden she'd been carrying for years. As she turned to leave, a movement in the doorway caught her eye. She froze, her heart jumping into her throat. Victor stood there wearing a robe over pajamas, a glass of water in his hand. Mr. Harrington, she said quickly, rising from the bench. I'm sorry if I woke you. You said I could. He held up his hand. It's fine. His voice was rough with sleep, but not angry. I was already awake. They stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment. Employer and employee caught in a strange new territory neither knew how to navigate. That wasn't the same thing you played at dinner, he said finally. No. That was Chopin too. But a waltz, not a nocturne. Victor nodded, as if this information mattered somehow. It was nice. The compliment was awkward, stilted, but it seemed genuine. Elena didn't know how to respond, so she simply nodded. I should let you go home, he said. It's late. Yes, sir, good night. Elena slipped past him, careful not to get too close. As she gathered her things from the staff closet, she felt oddly unsettled. Something had changed tonight, but she wasn't sure exactly what or how much. The next morning came too quickly. Elena had barely slept 4 hours before her alarm went off, reminding her that regardless of last night's events, she still had a job to do. Her daughter Anna called as Elena was having her coffee. How was work? Anna asked. Anything exciting happen at the fancy house? Elena hesitated. How could she possibly explain what had happened? that she had played the piano for the first time in years in front of rich strangers, because her employer had tried to humiliate her. Nothing much, she said instead. Just the usual cleaning. Mom, Anna said, her voice taking on the patient tone she used when she thought her mother was holding something back. You sound weird. Did something happen with Mr. Harrington? Did he give you a hard time again? No, nothing like that, Elena assured her. Just tired. It was a late night. Well, get some rest today. Oh, I almost forgot to tell you. I got an A on my nursing ethics paper. The conversation shifted to Anna's studies, and Elena listened with genuine pride as her daughter talked about her classes and her plans for the clinical rotation coming up next semester. This was why she cleaned houses, why she endured Victor Harrington's coldness, so Anna could have the chances Elena had lost. When Elena arrived at the mansion that morning, she braced herself for awkwardness or worse, for Victor to pretend nothing had happened. But his car wasn't in the driveway. She used her key to let herself in and found a note on the kitchen counter. Ms. Vasquez, meeting with Volkov downtown. Won't be back until evening. Please ensure the piano is dusted properly. Elena read the note twice, not sure whether to laugh or be annoyed. After last night, his only comment was about dusting the piano. Some things never changed. She went about her usual morning routine, starting with the kitchen and working her way through the downstairs rooms. When she reached the grand hall, she approached the piano with special care, using a soft cloth to remove any fingerprints, including her own from last night. As she worked, Elena noticed something different on top of the piano. A folder sat where there had been nothing before. Curious, she opened it and found sheet music inside, the complete Chopin Nocturnes. Elena stared at the music in confusion. The book was clearly new, the pages still crisp. Had Victor left this for her? Or was it just a coincidence, something he had purchased for himself or another guest? The sound of the front door opening startled her. Elena quickly closed the folder and returned to her dusting as footsteps approached the grand hall. Ms. Vasquez. Victor's voice was formal as ever, but there was a slight hesitation in it that hadn't been there before. Mr. Harrington, she replied, turning to face him. I wasn't expecting you back so soon. He looked different somehow, more subdued, less rigidly perfect. His tie was slightly crooked and he seemed distracted. The meeting with Volkov went well, he said, not quite meeting her eyes. He's agreed to invest in the downtown project. A significant amount. That's good news, Elena replied cautiously. Yes. Victor cleared his throat. He had one unusual condition, though. Elena waited, a knot forming in her stomach. Whatever was coming, she suspected it involved her. He's hosting a charity event next month at his home. He asked if you would perform. A short piece, nothing too demanding. Victor spoke quickly, as if uncomfortable with the request. I told him I would ask you, but that you're not obligated to. He wants me to play the piano at his charity event? Elena interrupted, stunned. Yes, he was quite insistent. Victor paused, then added, I would compensate you for your time, of course, above your usual rate. Elena felt a strange mix of emotions, surprise, flattery, suspicion, and a tiny spark of excitement. To play again in front of people who wanted to hear her, but also to be put on display, a curiosity. The cleaning lady who could play Chopin. I don't know, she said honestly. I haven't performed in public for over 20 years. Victor nodded as if he had expected this response. Think about it. Volkov said to tell you there's no pressure, but he believes talents should be shared. He hesitated, then gestured toward the sheet music. I thought you might want something to practice with, if you decide to accept. So the music was for her. Elena didn't know what to say. The gesture was thoughtful in a way she had never associated with Victor Harrington. Thank you, she said finally. I'll think about it. Victor nodded again, looking relieved that the conversation was over. Good, that's good. He started to walk away, then stopped and turned back. Ms. Vasquez? Yes, Mr. Harrington? You play beautifully. I'm sorry I didn't know. With that, he left the room, leaving Elena staring after him, wondering if last night had changed more than she realized. 3 weeks passed. Elena continued her cleaning duties at the Harrington mansion, but something had shifted in the air between her and Victor. There were no more cutting remarks, no cold stares when she entered a room. Instead, an awkward politeness had taken root, neither of them quite sure how to behave around the other. The sheet music remained on top of the piano. Each day, Elena dusted around it carefully, not moving it, not opening it. But she thought about it constantly. "You should do it," Anna said when Elena finally told her about the dinner party and Mr. Volkov's invitation. They were sitting in Elena's small kitchen, sharing a late dinner after Anna's evening class. "Mom, this could be amazing for you." Elena stirred her soup absently. "I'm not a performer anymore, Anna. I'm a housekeeper." "You can be both," her daughter insisted. "And maybe this is a chance to be more. At my age, after 20 years away from serious music? Don't be ridiculous. I heard you playing last week when I came to pick you up. You were practicing when I arrived, remember? It didn't sound like someone who can't perform anymore." Elena sighed. She had started using the piano during her lunch breaks, just for a few minutes each day. Victor had given her explicit permission, seeming almost eager for her to practice. Each time she told herself it was just for enjoyment, not preparation. Yet she found herself returning to the more challenging pieces, working through difficult passages again and again. "Even if I wanted to," Elena said, "I don't have anything to wear to a fancy charity event. I can't show up in my cleaning uniform." Anna's eyes lit up. "Leave that to me. Remember Mrs. Chen from my dorm? Her mom owns that consignment shop downtown. High-end stuff that rich ladies get tired of. I bet we could find something perfect." 2 days later, Elena found herself standing in front of a mirror in Elegant again, trying on a simple black dress that Anna and Mrs. Chen insisted was perfect. The price had been drastically reduced as a favor to Anna, who had helped Mrs. Chen's daughter with nursing school applications. "You look beautiful, Mom," Anna said, her eyes bright with pride. Elena hardly recognized herself. The woman in the mirror looked elegant, dignified. She looked like someone who might play piano at a charity event hosted by a Russian investor. "What do you think, Mrs. Chen? Too much?" Elena asked nervously. The shop owner studied her with a professional eye. "Not too much. Just right. Simple, classic. You have the posture of a pianist. Stand straight, head high. The dress just helps people see what's already there." That evening, Elena called the number Victor had given her for Mr. Volkov's assistant. "I'll do it," she said. "I'll play at the charity event." The following 2 weeks became a blur of preparation. Elena still cleaned the Harrington mansion 5 days a week, but now she spent her lunch hour and an additional hour after work at the piano. Victor had adjusted her schedule to accommodate the practice time, something that would have been unthinkable a month ago. "You'll need this," Victor said one afternoon, appearing in the doorway as Elena was practicing a particularly difficult passage of Chopin's Ballade No. 1. He held out a small recording device. "To listen to yourself. All serious musicians do it." Elena took the recorder, surprised once again by this new thoughtfulness. "Thank you, Mr. Harrington." "Victor," he said suddenly. "When you're at the piano at least, I think you can call me Victor." Their eyes met briefly and Elena nodded. "Thank you, Victor." 2 days before the charity event, Elena visited her mother at the care home. At 78, Maria Vasquez's body was failing, but her mind remained sharp. She listened intently as Elena told her about the upcoming performance. "I knew you would play again someday," her mother said, patting Elena's hand. "Your father always said your music was too beautiful to stay silent forever." "I wish you could be there," Elena said. Her mother smiled. "I will be in my own way. Play the ballad for me. It was always your father's favorite." The night of the charity event arrived cold and clear. Victor had offered to drive Elena to Mr. Volkov's estate. Another surprise in what had become a month of surprises. "You're nervous," he observed as they drove through the city. Elena nodded, clutching her small purse tightly. Inside was a faded photograph of her parents at her first recital, tucked there as a talisman. "What if I make a mistake? These are important people." "Important doesn't mean better," Victor said quietly. "I've learned that recently." They arrived at the Volkov estate, a sprawling property overlooking the bay. The house blazed with lights, luxury cars filling the circular driveway. Elena felt a flutter of panic. What was she doing here among these people? "You belong here tonight," Victor said as if reading her thoughts. "Remember that." The interior of the house was even more opulent than Victor's mansion, if such a thing were possible. At least 60 guests in formal attire mingled in a vast room, dominated by a concert grand piano on a slightly raised platform. Elena's heart raced at the sight of it. Mr. Volkov greeted them warmly. kissing Elena's hand with old-world courtesy. "Our guest of honor," he said. "I am so pleased you accepted my invitation." "The honor is mine," Elena replied, surprised to find she meant it. "You will play after dinner," Mr. Volkov explained. "Just one piece, perhaps 10 minutes. But first, please enjoy yourself. You are not staff tonight, but my special guest." The dinner passed in a blur. Elena sat at a table with Victor and several other guests, including an elderly woman who had once been a piano teacher at Juilliard. They discussed music with a passion that made Elena feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. "Your daughter isn't here?" Victor asked during a lull in the conversation. "Anna had a clinical rotation she couldn't miss," Elena explained. "But she helped me get ready. She's been my biggest supporter. She must be proud of you." "I think tonight I'm more proud of her," Elena said, smiling. "She's the one who convinced me I could do this." After dinner, Mr. Volkov called for everyone's attention and introduced Elena. There was polite applause as she made her way to the piano. Her legs felt wooden, her mouth dry. As she settled on the bench, Elena looked out at the sea of expectant faces. She caught Victor's eye and he gave her a small, encouraging nod. She took a deep breath and placed her hands on the keys. For a moment, doubt rushed through her. Then she thought of her father, of her mother in the care home, of Anna working toward her dreams. She thought of the years of cleaning other people's homes so her daughter could have a better life. She thought of the music that had lived inside her all this time waiting. Elena began to play the ballade. Within moments, the room disappeared. There were no wealthy investors, no bosses, no judgment. There was only the music, complex and beautiful, flowing from her fingers as if the 20-year gap had never existed. She played for her parents who had sacrificed for her early training. She played for Anna, whose courage inspired her daily, and in some small way she played for Victor Harrington, whose cruelty had accidentally led her back to this moment. When the final chord faded, the room erupted in applause. Elena stood and bowed, tears shining in her eyes but not falling. She had done it. After 20 years, she had returned to the thing she loved most. The rest of the evening passed in a whirlwind of congratulations and questions. Several guests asked where she performed regularly, looking confused when she explained that she was normally a housekeeper. Mr. Volkov's wife pulled her aside at one point. "My husband's foundation supports musical education for adults. Returning to their craft," she explained. "We would be honored to offer you a scholarship for master classes if you're interested." By the time Victor drove her home, Elena felt as if she had stepped into someone else's life. They sat in comfortable silence for much of the journey, the night's events settling around them. "What will you do now?" Victor asked as they neared her apartment building. Elena looked out at the city lights. "Keep cleaning your house," she said with a small smile. "But also I think I'll accept Mrs. Volkov's offer of lessons. And perhaps teach a bit myself. There are children in my neighborhood who have no access to music education." Victor nodded thoughtfully. "You could use the piano at my house for teaching. The grand hall sits empty most days." Elena turned to look at him, surprised yet again by this new version of her employer. "Why are you doing this? All of this?" Victor was quiet for a long moment. "Because I was wrong," he finally said. "About you. About a lot of things. And when you're my age, opportunities to fix your mistakes don't come along very often." As they pulled up to her building, Elena saw Anna waiting on the steps, still in her nursing scrubs. She must have rushed over straight from her clinical rotation. "Thank you for tonight," Elena said to Victor. "For everything." "No," he replied, meeting her eyes directly. "Thank you for the music, Elena." As she stepped out of the car, Anna rushed forward, eager to hear about the performance. Over her daughter's shoulder, Elena watched Victor's car pull away, carrying a man who seemed different from the cold tycoon who had tried to humiliate her 1 month ago. Elena held her daughter close, feeling the warm spring night wrap around them both. Tomorrow she would return to the Harrington mansion with her cleaning supplies. She would polish the floors and dust the shelves. But she would also sit at the piano during her lunch break, and the music would fill the empty rooms. Some dreams never truly die.